see. We have no God, we made our own. And now we'll never be alone. Since you came along, we just can't agree. Nobody's ever seen a look on your face. When you turn it on, you will all believe. A look on your face. Everyone in no place. How much can you fake? The look on your face. Offer your confessions in you. We can hide. Covered by the past and sweet, sweet memories. Does your picture
Yeah, man, super cool track. I love the drums, obviously, and I actually really love the bass tone. There's that like great bass breakdown section with the drum, with like the super compressed, like saturated drums. Super cool.
Yes, so crazy tune, kind of a fun story. Yono Say, one of my favorite bands to work with, they're local, or were a local Baltimore band. Every member in that band went to music school with me, so I had known all these dudes for quite a long time. And the singer, Dan Feldman, who's now got another project, Airplane Man, and a new record coming out under Sleepy Gary. We were working on this record, and we really wanted to take it further than just like a recording of a band, which can be a really difficult thing to overcome, because you might hear these records that you really like, and then when you break it down, it's like, well, that's just a drum loop, or that's super augmented, or, you know, just they didn't have a synthesizer in the band. You know, nobody played that, so we needed to add all these things. So we actually recorded the album and then spent a lot of time going back and dismantling every single song and rebuilding it. So the drummer, super talented drummer, and with so many talented people, sometimes you just never really get the
Right, just the straight up groove. Yeah, totally.
Honestly, that's a big thing. You know, I think that's why I actually ended up getting to play drums, is because that's maybe the only thing I know how to play.
Yeah.
so that's a chopped up drum groove you hear at the beginning. So we just found that, we chopped it up. The very intro of that song is actually exactly what I was talking about. That's a mic pointed at the floor and just compressed. Nothing else.
That's it.
Just one
Nothing
mic.
else.
Yeah. Pan
Amazing.
left and right, one echo boy on the right hand side to give it that slap back. So it's kind of just like slightly offset. Then you have bass, one of my favorite tricks for just getting that, like, it's not really James Jamerson at all. You know, it's just kind of inspired by that bass
Right,
tone.
that plucky old school bass tone, yeah.
So that's, you know, palm muted.
That's totally my jam, by the way. That's
yeah.
the bass I'm about. Like, I don't know, you can see the beetle bass.
Yes,
behind me.
I need
Like, I'm all
it.
about
I've been
that
trying
kind
to
of
get one.
This is a fake. It's an Epiphone, so it's cheap. But if you get flat wounds on it and use the front pickup, the thing is big.
Oh yeah, I got a buddy with one of the Hofners, but the cheaper Hofner lines, and they all sound.
They also sound great.
You know, it's
Recorded. Yeah,
exactly.
totally.
So that bass tone is straight into a 1073, already distorted, right into an 1176, also just distorted and committed. We just tracked it in that way, just destroyed, and palm muted, or we might have put a mute on it, but just that. I remember this great bass player, but I had to convince him, like, I need you to play with a pick. You know, like, this is that, like, the sound that I want is like plucky pick on a P bass kind of sound.
Totally.
And I wasn't getting it with fingers. And it was one of those moments, again, with like truly great musicians. Sometimes there's a tough moment when the recording comes into it, because you're like, no, there's a trick. And this is like how to get that snare drum to sound good. It sounds awful in the room, but it's because I've detuned every lug on it. And it's basically just paper, you know, but still sounds good. So that was kind of like a learning experience for everybody.
Yeah. Wow. Super cool.
Yeah. So then there's So basically those drums are all just chopped up and then augmented with some samples on the sides. When you hit the chorus, you've kind of got this shimmering back and forth element between hi-hats, because I've still just got kind of a mono drum that I've chopped up that's only room mic. That whole, again, I recorded 10 mics and we ended up just taking a room mic and a kick mic, and maybe that was it. And just
For the entire track.
Yeah.
Wow, so that snare drum is just from the floor mic.
Well, I probably got snare on there too. But yeah, I pulled this session up because this is kind of an older one for me. It was probably 2017. So I pulled it up this morning just to make sure I could remember
Have
what
a
I was
look at
looking
it.
Yeah. So then we augmented a little bit of that, added some synth. A lot of the bass lines we doubled with a Juno.
Right, I was hearing some lower bass also, yeah.
The trick for that I've done, probably around that time, that was a big learning record for me because we were really trying to get this like produced indie rock sound. In Logic, you can actually export to Midi. So if you use flex pitch and analyze the Midi or analyze the pitches of a bass line, I can then go into that analyzer and send it out as MIDI. So I then have a MIDI track of my bass line. You might need to go in and move some of the notes around, but you'll have it. And then you can send that MIDI out to a synth. So I don't have to play it in real time, but it's exactly the same as the bass line. So I'm not worried about like, oh gosh, am I going to have to go back and quantize all this because I don't want phasing between my synth bass and my real bass.
Love it.
So
yeah.
That was that trick. Same thing with a lot of the guitar lines. We ended up playing them on synths to kind of fill it out and make it just sparkle. Tons of Altar Boy, Little Altar Boy, the beginning, intro, the vocals. It's like both of us kind of screeching and in harmony and then pitching it every which way. I think that song is like brought to you by Sound Toys.
Yeah, we'll reach out to Sound Toys for sponsorship for this podcast.
Totally.
That would be nice. Amazing. So cool. Can we talk about communication for a bit? How do you communicate with the artists that you're working with? How do you make sure that everyone's on the same page at the same time?
Yeah. I think your job as an engineer and sometimes, right, we all wear so many hats. We're engineers and producers, and so the engineer didn't used to have to be the person explaining why everything was happening. A producer might have made the decision about it. This is what I want the drums to sound like. And now you've gone and done it for them and they're communicating with the artist. So it can be tough to be trying to tune a drum, set up a mic, and tell somebody why you don't want to use that snare drum and you want to use this other snare drum because you've got this vision down the line. So I think education is just a huge part of recording with artists. You're kind of there to like help. Depending on where they are in the process, how many records they've made, you might be there trying to help explain what's going to happen to the song after you start. A lot of times when I work with somebody, it might be their first or second song they've ever made. So you're kind of there to help, like, this is how mix notes work. Sometimes I'm explaining that.
Totally.
Just be kind. And be open and make sure that people know that no question is dumb. It breaks my heart when somebody asks a question and I think I've answered it in a kind and open way. And they're like, oh, like silly me. I didn't know anything about that. And it's like, no, like, well, of course you didn't know, that's how I process the vocal. And that's great. We should be talking about this together. And why did you ask that question? Is there something you're missing? Trying to talk about.
Yeah.
The language that we all use to talk about music, that's muddy or this feels tubby or rolled off, or not everybody knows that. So your job, I think, as an engineer and as a mixer is to be able to take whatever somebody's telling you and then filter it into EQ, compression, saturation. What does it actually mean?
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. It's there's no such thing as a dumb question. And if you unless somebody's a dick, anybody should be able to answer a dumb question in a very generous way, and I feel like that's like That's the way to do it, at least this day and age. Like the classic gear sluts, moment when you're first getting started and you're afraid to ask a question because you're going to be judged by like, the old boys club.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that forum is like, there's a lot to be learned on there, and there's a lot to learn what not to do and what to do. And
been rebranded those as Gear Space.
Yeah, which is good. Yeah. I'm super in favor of that. It couldn't possibly be enough of that in the world. Let's keep that running. But I think, just trying to learn together. And that's one of my favorite things. I think a lot of artists end up, making a song with me or making an album with me. And then feel very fortunate enough to do it again. They come back and we get to do it again, which means more than you can imagine, that somebody would say, I trusted you and now we want to do this again. That second record is always so easy for me. At least communication wise, we understand each other. I know what they're looking for. They know what I'm going to provide. But oftentimes I need to remind people, kind of like we were talking at the beginning, that sky's the limit. If I send you this half finished arrangement, don't worry about telling me you don't like the drums. They're always like, I'm sorry, no, it was a really good idea. I really liked your drum part, but it's just not what I want. It's like, my feelings aren't hurt.
Yes. I have to do that a lot, actually, of telling people, hey, I'm cool. You're not offending me. Like, I want to hear your feedback. It makes me a better, person and a better engineer. Like, if you tell me what you want. And it's like, I'm not offended. Like, my ego has been crushed enough times that I don't care about, constructive feedback,
Yeah, well, I think but it's different, right? Like, my feedback cannot be that way. I do have to be careful with my feedback, because if somebody comes to me and says, I want a drum part that sounds like, and I'm like, here's why we can't do that. Or here's why that idea is not going to work. I would rather show you why that idea is. If I don't think it's going to work, I better try it. Even if I'm positive it's not going to work. I've been wrong so many times because of that, And I think there's a lot of hubris involved, and you need to get over that and try everybody's ideas.
Yeah. Because the artist knows the song better than you do at the end of the day. It's still their baby. It's still, they might have a vision of something that you never would have thought about. So you gotta keep an open mind to that, for sure.
Yeah. Although sometimes I think I might know the song better by the end of the day.
Maybe. There's definitely been times where I felt like, why do I care about this song more than the artist at this point?
Oh, well, that happens for sure. But I almost mean sometimes an artist writes a song and they don't perform it really. So they've written this song, but I wrote the arrangement and I mixed it. And so I've heard that song 1,000 times in 1,000 different versions. And they were like, well, I wrote it, I made a demo, and then I sent it to you. And I've maybe played it 10 times out live. I'm like,
wow,
amazing. I bet I know that song inside and out.
Wow, I love this. I love this conversation because we're really getting into the trenches of what music producers actually do on a day-to-day basis. Do you want to touch on mixing? Do you have an approach to mixing, or do you ever send out for mixing?
I almost never send out for mixing. I send out for mastering a lot. Shout out Matt Leffler Schulman, Mobtown Studios, one of my favorite mastering engineers.
All right.
And as far as mixing, every once in a while, actually, Matt has mixed a couple records that I've engineered, probably because they came in through him, and then I ended up recording it, and so it went back to him for mixing. But sometimes that's really hard for me to give back, to give it away, because I put a mic off the floor 5 inches, but I didn't compress it on the way in, and then you're listening to that mic like, why was he miking the wall? And I'm like, no, I had an idea. Trust me,
Right,
there's so many,
you gotta communicate a lot of things.
Yeah, and there's so many unfinished...
Or print things.
Totally.
I guess.
There's a lot of unfinished conversations with the band. If the band's in the studio with you for 5 days and you're talking about, okay, well, here's how we want this vocal to sound, but down the road, because we don't have time to mix it while we're tracking 12 songs in 5 days and we're, setting up and tearing down. I think those conversations can kind of get lost. I don't know that I have a real one size fits all. I don't start every mix the same way because, every once in a while